The building is on fire. Smoke fills the corridor. The lights are gone. Every second costs something. And somewhere in that darkness, two men are making a decision. One of them is running, blindly, desperately, mouth open, lungs pulling in smoke, mind spinning with images of the worst possible outcome. He hits a wall. He turns back. He loses time. He loses himself. The other man has stopped. Not because he isn't afraid. He is. His heart is hammering. His hands are shaking. But he has stopped for 2 full seconds, 2 seconds that feel like a lifetime, and in those 2 seconds he is breathing, he is counting, he is thinking, where is the exit? What do I know? What is the next move? 2 seconds. That's the entire gap between the man who panics and the man who survives. You've been in burning buildings your whole life. Not literal ones, but the fire was real. The job that collapsed. The relationship that fell apart. The moment you needed to be at your best and your mind went completely blank. The crisis that showed up at the worst possible time. The pressure that found you before you were ready. You are always in a burning building. The only question is whether you are the first man or the second. Today, you become the second man. For good. Intro. What separates the man who crumbles under pressure from the man who becomes sharper, calmer, and more dangerous the harder things get? It is not raw intelligence. The world is full of brilliant men who fall apart when the stakes rise. It is not physical strength. The gyms are full of powerful men who cannot handle a difficult conversation without shutting down. It is not wealth, or status, or education, or connections. It is a trained relationship with pressure itself. The greatest men who ever lived, the philosophers, the warriors, the builders, the survivors, they all faced pressure that would destroy most people. And they didn't just survive it. They grew through it. They used it. They came out on the other side of it larger, sharper, and more capable than they went in. This is not accident. It is not luck. It is not personality. It is method. And that method, built across centuries, refined through the hardest circumstances human beings have ever faced, is exactly what this video is about. By the time we are done here, you will have a complete framework for turning pressure from the thing that breaks you into the thing that builds you. Not theory. Not motivational noise. Real principles, grounded in the lives of real men who face real fire and refuse to panic. If you are new here, welcome to Inner Steel. This channel exists for one reason: to build men that pressure cannot break. Subscribe right now. Stay with us. What we are constructing here is not built in a single sitting. It is built video by video, principle by principle, day by day. You are going to want to be here for all of it. Let's begin. Point 1. Pressure reveals, IT doesn't create. In the winter of 1914, Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, became locked in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea, just off the coast of Antarctica. The ice had closed around the hull like a fist, tightening week by week, and by October of 1915, it was clear the ship was not going to survive. The beams groaned. The planks buckled. The Endurance, named for the family motto, "By endurance we conquer," was being crushed by a continent. Shackleton ordered the men to abandon ship. They watched it sink. And then they were alone. 27 men on the ice shelf with 3 lifeboats, dwindling supplies, and no way to communicate with the outside world. Rescue was not coming. No one knew where they were. The nearest inhabited land was over 800 miles away, across the most violent ocean on the planet. They would spend the next 634 days in that environment. Temperatures dropping to 40 below zero. Rations stretched to the edge of starvation. Ice shifting constantly beneath their camps. And then a journey across the Drake Passage, widely considered the most dangerous stretch of open water on Earth, in a 22-foot wooden lifeboat. Not a single man died. There was no mutiny. There was no psychological collapse that cost lives. And here is what you need to understand about why. Shackleton had not assembled extraordinary men. Many of them were ordinary sailors hired in a hurry. What made the difference was not what was inside those men when they boarded the ship. It was what was inside them when the ice closed in. And Shackleton had understood something crucial before he ever set sail. The crisis would not create character. It would reveal it. He had famously posted an advertisement before the expedition. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger. Safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. 5,000 men applied. He chose 27. He chose them not primarily for their technical skills, though those mattered, but for what he could see beneath the surface. He famously hired a musician on the spot during the interview because he sensed the man's spirit would be good for the group. He was right. During the worst of it, that man played the banjo to keep morale alive on the ice. The first truth of pressure mastery is this: pressure does not create who you are. It reveals who you already are. This should terrify you or energize you, depending on what you have been building. If you have been building yourself, quietly, consistently, through chosen difficulty, then the crisis is a stage. It is the moment the man you have been becoming steps forward. If you have not been building, if you have been coasting, avoiding, running from discomfort, then the crisis is a mirror. And you will not like what it shows you. The Marcus Aurelius who faced plagues, wars, political betrayal, and the death of children he loved was not created by those events. He was revealed by them. But he had been building himself since adolescence through philosophy, through discipline, through the deliberate practice of examining his own mind and governing his own response. When the pressure arrived, there was a man there to meet it. Every small discomfort you avoid is a missed construction opportunity. Every difficult conversation you postpone, every hard training session you skip, every moment you choose comfort over growth, these are not neutral decisions. They are withdrawals from an account you will desperately need one day. The Stoics called this practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, would wake each morning and deliberately remind himself of everything that could go wrong that day. He would imagine loss, failure, opposition, betrayal. Not to fill himself with dread. To drain pressure of its ambush power. Because when you have already faced something in your mind, when you have walked through the scenario and found your feet still under you, it cannot arrive as a shock. It arrives as a thing you already know how to meet. Stop asking for less pressure. Start building the man who deserves more. Point 2. The body follows the breath. In 1944, a 29-year-old Jewish psychiatrist arrived at Auschwitz. His name was Viktor Frankl. He had been working on a manuscript, a major psychological treatise he believed would be the defining work of his life. When he arrived at the camp, the manuscript was taken from him. His wife was taken. His mother and brother were taken. His father would die in his arms before the war ended. Everything external that defined his life was stripped away layer by layer, systematically, with the mechanical efficiency of industrial murder. What could not be stripped was the one thing the system could not reach. Frankl watched the other prisoners. He watched what happened to men in conditions of absolute deprivation and absolute terror. And he noticed something that confounded the simple narrative of survival. It was not always the physically strongest who survived. It was not always the most intelligent. The men who held on, who maintained their clarity, their dignity, their humanity, were the ones who had found something the camp could not take. Not an external resource. An internal one. A space. The smallest, most precious space in human experience. The gap between what happens to you and what you choose to do about it. He wrote afterward. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is the territory you are trying to expand. And the fastest, most reliable way to expand it, faster than any philosophical reframe, faster than any mindset technique, is breath. When pressure hits, your body responds before your mind does. The amygdala fires. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. Heart rate accelerates. Vision narrows. Digestion halts. Blood moves toward the large muscle groups. Your nervous system is mobilizing for physical survival, for the lion on the savannah that your ancient ancestors faced. You are not on a savannah. You are in a meeting, or a conversation, or a financial crisis, or a moment of public failure. But your body doesn't know that. It only knows the chemical signature of threat, and it responds accordingly. This is why panic is so disabling. The physiological response is real and powerful, but it is aimed at the wrong target. You don't need to run. You don't need to fight. You need to think, and your body is actively working against your ability to do so. The breath is the override switch. The vagus nerve, one of the longest nerves in the body, running from the brainstem through the chest and into the abdomen, is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is your calm, rational, executive function state. And the vagus nerve responds directly to controlled exhalation. A slow, deliberate, extended exhale activates parasympathetic tone. Your heart rate slows. Cortisol drops. Blood returns to the prefrontal cortex. You can think again. This is not soft. This is not incense and intention. This is cardiovascular physiology, and it is used by the most pressure-tested humans on Earth. Navy SEALs call it box breathing. You breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Repeat 4 times. Your heart rate, which may have spiked to 140 or beyond, begins descending in under 90 seconds. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, decision-making, and strategic thinking, comes back online. Special forces operators use this before breaching a building. Surgeons use it before a critical intervention. Formula One drivers use it on the grid. These are not men with the luxury of falling apart. And they have made this technique, this ancient, simple, physiological fact, a trained reflex. Frankl did not describe box breathing. But the methods he and other camp survivors used, prayer, deliberate focus, meditation, the conscious direction of attention, all of them are, at their physiological core, practices of controlled breath that maintain the gap between stimulus and response. The gap is yours to own. The breath is your key. When you feel the panic rising, and you will begin to recognize it now as a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest, a heat in the face, a narrowing of the visual field, do not fight it with willpower. Willpower is a finite resource and panic will outlast it. Instead, breathe. Deliberately. Slowly. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. 4 hold. Do it twice. Feel the shift. That shift is your body coming back to you. Frankl endured what no human being should be asked to endure. But the principle he identified belongs to every man. The space between stimulus and response is yours. Breath is how you enter it, and practice is how you make it larger. Point 3. Reframe the threat as a test. Theodore Roosevelt was not born to be Theodore Roosevelt. He arrived in the world in 1858 as a sickly, wheezing child in a Manhattan brownstone, with asthma so severe he could barely sleep lying down. He spent nights sitting upright in chairs, gasping for air. His body was his adversary from the beginning. He watched other boys run and fight and wrestle while he sat on the sidelines, breathing through a chest that seemed designed to fail him. His father, a man he idolized completely, sat him down one day with brutal honesty and no apology. Theodore, you have the mind but you have not the body. And without the help of the body, the mind cannot go as far as it should. You must make your body. A boy of 10 was being told, your limitation is your test. Pass it or fail it, that is your work. Roosevelt chose to pass it. Relentlessly. He built a gym in the family home. He threw himself into boxing, and he was not talented. He got hit constantly, kept getting hit, kept getting up. He took up wrestling, rowing, hiking. When he grew older, he went west to the Dakota Badlands and worked as a cattle rancher in temperatures and conditions that defeated experienced frontiersmen. He nearly drowned in rivers. He was bucked from horses. He tracked armed outlaws through blizzards on foot. He did not do this because he was fearless. He did it because he had decided that difficulty was not his enemy. Difficulty was his curriculum. In 1901, at 42, He became the youngest president in American history. In 1912, while delivering a campaign speech in Milwaukee, he was shot in the chest. The bullet passed through his steel eyeglass case and his folded 50-page speech before lodging in his chest wall. He was bleeding through his shirt. He reached inside, felt the wound, and made an assessment. No blood on my lips. The lung is not hit. He then said to his aides, "I will make this speech or die. It is one thing or the other." He spoke for 90 minutes. With a bullet in his chest. He finished the speech before going to the hospital. The bullet stayed in his chest for the rest of his life. He refused to have it removed. His doctors told him he could. He didn't bother. It no longer seemed important. Here is the thing that Roosevelt understood, and that science has since confirmed: how you label a stressful event determines what that event does to your body and your mind. When you read pressure as a threat, your brain activates threat response systems. The amygdala overwhelms the prefrontal cortex. Anxiety rises. Decision-making degrades. Vision narrows. You begin catastrophizing, running worst-case scenarios on a loop. You get smaller. Your options shrink. You go into survival mode when what you need is performance mode. When you read the same pressure as a test, as a challenge to rise to rather than a danger to escape, your brain activates an entirely different set of systems. Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal's research on what she calls the stress response shows that people who view stressful situations as challenges rather than threats show better cognitive function, better decision quality, better creative problem solving, and better physical recovery afterward. The physiological arousal is identical. The outcome is entirely different. The event doesn't change. The label you attach to it changes everything. Roosevelt's whole life was one continuous reframe. The sickly body was not a verdict, it was a test. The political setbacks were not defeats, they were tests. The assassination attempt was not a catastrophe, it was, apparently, barely worth finishing the speech about. Every time pressure arrives and you feel the pull toward reading it as a threat, you have a choice that is available in a fraction of a second. Is this happening to me, or for me? One reading produces panic. The other produces performance. Neither reading changes the facts. Both readings change everything else. Point 4. Silence your internal commentator. On April 26, 1986, at 1:23 in the morning, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. 2 explosions in rapid succession destroyed the reactor core and blew off the 1,000-ton reactor lid, exposing the graphite moderator to open air and initiating one of the worst technological disasters in human history. In the control room, the operators who survived the immediate chaos and made the clearest decisions in the hours that followed were not necessarily the most technically experienced. They were the ones who most quickly managed to silence the voice inside that was screaming, "This cannot be happening." That voice, the internal commentator, is one of the most dangerous forces a man can face under pressure. Not because it is always wrong. Because it is almost always untimely. It arrives precisely when you need clarity the most, and it delivers the thing least useful to clarity: noise. You know this voice. It runs your most uncomfortable moments like a production. Before the difficult conversation, you're going to say the wrong thing. This is going to go badly. You should just avoid it. Before the high-stakes presentation, everyone can see you're nervous. You don't belong in this room. During the crisis, this is too much. You're not built for this. Look at how badly you're handling this. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commanding the most powerful civilization on earth, a man whose decisions affected millions of lives, fought this voice every single day. His private journal, the Meditations, was never meant to be published. It was a daily record of his interior combat. The voice told him he was tired. The voice told him the task was impossible. The voice told him other men had it easier and deserved success more. He wrote back to it, every morning, with philosophy and discipline. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Not because he felt powerful. Because he was fighting for that power constantly. The internal commentator has one fuel source: the belief that your thoughts about an event are the same as the event. They are not. Your thoughts are a story you are generating in real time, and under pressure, that story is assembled from fear, from past failures, from worst-case thinking, from incomplete information. It feels like reality. It is not reality. It is a draft. And it is almost always the worst possible draft. Here is how you silence it, or at least reduce its volume to something manageable. First, name it. The moment you recognize the commentator running, say it internally: that's the noise. That's not information. This act of naming creates the gap Frankl described. You step back from the voice. You are not the voice. You are the man who hears it. And that distinction, as subtle as it sounds, is enormous. Second, redirect to process. The commentator lives in abstraction. It feeds on catastrophic futures and shameful pasts. It cannot follow you into the present tense. Drive your attention into the most specific next action available to you. Not what if this goes wrong, but what is the next right move? Not what will people think, but what does this moment require? Process is a place the commentator cannot breathe. It suffocates in specificity. Third, use third-person self-talk. This sounds unusual until you try it. Ethan Kross, a psychologist at the University of Michigan, has done significant research on what he calls self-distancing, the practice of referring to yourself by name when under pressure. Instead of "I can't handle this," you say internally, "What does this situation actually require?" And use your own name. The effect is measurable. People who use this technique show greater emotional regulation, better decision-making under pressure, and faster recovery from setbacks. The self-distancing creates a pocket of objectivity in the middle of the storm. The best performers in the highest pressure fields are not people who feel nothing. They feel everything. The difference is that they have learned not to treat their feelings as facts. The commentator is feeling, translated into language. And language, unlike feeling, can be examined, questioned, and dismissed. Train it. Or it will train you. Point 5. Control the controllable. Release the rest. Epictetus had his leg deliberately broken by his master. He was a slave in ancient Rome, owned by a freedman named Epaphroditus who served in the court of the Emperor Nero. At some point, for reasons lost to history, Epaphroditus decided to break Epictetus's leg to demonstrate his absolute power over his property. The account, preserved through later writers, describes Epictetus watching calmly as the leg was twisted, saying, "You are going to break it." The leg broke. He said, "Did I not tell you?" He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And he became one of the most profound and enduring philosophers in the history of human thought. His entire philosophy grew from the simplest, most powerful observation born from absolute powerlessness. There are things within your control, and things outside it. Confusing one for the other is the source of all avoidable suffering. What is within your control? Your thoughts, your intentions, your attention, your effort, your choices, your character, your response. That is the complete list. Everything else falls outside it. What is not within your control? The economy. Other people's opinions of you. The outcome of your work after you have put in your best effort. The weather. Traffic. What happened to you as a child? What your competitors are doing. What people say about you behind your back. Your body's aging. The news. Most men, and I mean most, not some, spend the majority of their mental and emotional energy on the second category. They are infuriated by traffic. They are paralyzed by the thought of what others might think. They lie awake running conversations they cannot change, planning responses to things that have already happened, worrying about outcomes they cannot govern. They feel crushed, genuinely, physically crushed, by things that are outside their jurisdiction entirely. The pressure this creates is unique and particularly cruel. Because it is not the pressure of a real challenge being met, which is hard but alive and generative. It is the pressure of a war you cannot win. And you cannot win it because the battlefield is not yours. You are trying to control the weather. Epictetus had less control over his external life than almost any human being you can imagine. He was property. His labor belonged to someone else. His freedom belonged to someone else. His body, at one point, was broken on someone else's whim. And yet he developed a philosophy so powerful that the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who had all the external power in the world, studied Epictetus's teaching as his primary guide for how to live. The slave was teaching the emperor. Because the slave understood something the emperor had to keep learning: freedom is not the absence of constraints. Freedom is the mastery of your response to them. When pressure arrives, it always carries a mixture: some things you can control, many things you cannot. The first and most essential move is to sort them. Not eventually. Immediately. Before you respond, before you act, before you spend a single unit of attention, sort them. What here is mine to govern? What is not? Then pour everything into the first category. Absolute, complete, obsessive commitment to what is yours to do. And then, this is the hard part, and it is genuinely hard, release the second category. Not because it doesn't matter. Not because outcomes don't matter. But because trying to control what you cannot control costs you the only thing you actually have: your attention, your energy, your presence in the moment you can actually affect. Epictetus walked with a limp. He left behind words that have outlasted empires. Clean up the columns. Do the work that belongs to you. Let the rest be what it will be. Point 6. The man who slows down wins. On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil platform exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. It was 9:49 in the evening. The explosion killed 11 men immediately and triggered the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history. In the chaos that followed, fire erupting across the platform, emergency systems failing, 226 people trying to evacuate, decisions had to be made in seconds that would determine who lived. Among the survivors interviewed afterward, a common thread emerged from those who helped others to safety: they had slowed down. Not physically. They moved quickly enough. But mentally, in the middle of absolute chaos, they had imposed a deliberate pause. They stopped reacting and started deciding. They looked. They assessed. They chose a direction. Then they moved. One survivor described it this way: everything in me was screaming to just run. But I stopped for 2 seconds and thought, where are the lifeboats? What do I actually know? And those 2 seconds are why I'm here. 2 seconds. The entire gap between a reaction and a decision. In a culture that worships speed, that treats instant response as competence, that confuses quick with sharp, the idea of slowing down under pressure feels like weakness. It is the opposite. The fastest, most capable operators in every high-stakes field have the same counterintuitive practice. They impose deliberate pauses at critical moments. Not because they're slow. Because they've learned that speed without clarity produces errors, and errors under pressure compound catastrophically. In aviation, this is the checklist. Not because experienced pilots don't know their aircraft. Because checklist discipline prevents the confidence of expertise from becoming its own kind of dangerous blindness. Every critical juncture, the same juncture the pilot has navigated 500 times, gets the same deliberate stop and verify. This is why commercial aviation is one of the safest forms of travel in human history. Not because pilots are more skilled than other professionals. Because the system builds in mandatory pauses. In surgery, it's called the universal protocol, a mandatory timeout before any invasive procedure where the entire team stops, verifies the patient, verifies the procedure, verifies the site. Medical error drops. Not because surgeons became smarter. Because the pause was required. In elite military units, it's called tactical pause. When everything is going to pieces, when communication is breaking down, when the situation is unclear, when action feels urgently required, experienced leaders stop and say, "Give me 30 seconds." In those 30 seconds, they are gathering information, reassessing the situation, and issuing clear orders rather than reactive ones. The pause turns chaos into a decision. The Stoics called this capacity apatheia, freedom from the domination of impulse. Not apathy in the modern, empty sense. Freedom from being controlled by the first wave of emotion that hits. The ability to feel the heat without being consumed by it. To experience urgency without being enslaved by urgency. Here is the practical version. When pressure spikes, give yourself 30 seconds before you respond. Not 30 minutes, 30 seconds. A message that arrives in anger, wait 30 seconds before you type. A decision that needs to be made under pressure, take 30 seconds to breathe and look. A challenge issued in public, 30 seconds before you open your mouth. In 30 seconds, the first wave of the emotional flood begins to recede. In 30 seconds, the prefrontal cortex, your ability to think, comes back online. In 30 seconds, you can tell the difference between a reaction and a decision. Pressure wants your reaction. It counts on your reaction. A reaction is predictable, emotional, and often wrong. A decision, even made quickly, is deliberate and yours. Give the moment 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds will save you more times than you can count. Point 7. Build a pressure identity. David Goggins was not built the way he looks now. He grew up in poverty and violence in rural Indiana. His father was abusive, dominating the household through fear and cruelty. Goggins developed a severe stutter. He struggled in school. He failed his first ASVAB military entrance exam multiple times. By his mid-20s, he was working as a pest control worker, almost 300 pounds, living a life he described as the embodiment of everything he was afraid of becoming. Then he saw a television program about Navy SEAL training. And something shifted. Not all at once. He did not wake up the next morning transformed. What shifted was a decision. This is what I am going to become. Not what I want to become. What I am going to become. The distinction mattered enormously. He began building an identity before he had the evidence to support it. He lost over 100 pounds in under 3 months, a pace that was medically dangerous and probably should not be replicated. He failed Hell Week twice. The second time, he made it through with fractured feet, stress fractures in his legs, and severe dehydration. He was pulled from training by doctors. He came back a third time and passed. He went on to become a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, a Special Forces qualified operator, and then, after his military career, one of the most accomplished ultra-endurance athletes in history. He once ran 100 miles on a broken foot. In training. Not in a race. Just to see if he could. But the tool that made all of it possible was not physical. It was a practice he called the mental cookie jar. Every hard thing he had ever done, every moment he had pushed through when quitting was the comfortable and available option, went into the jar. And when new suffering arrived, when the voice said enough, Goggins reached into the jar and pulled out proof. I ran 40 miles on broken feet. I can do this. I have done hard things. This is a hard thing. I can do this. The cookie jar is evidence. And evidence changes identity. This is the mechanism. Identity shapes behavior in ways that willpower cannot sustain. When something is part of who you are, not just what you occasionally do, it becomes dramatically harder to abandon under pressure. A man who exercises when it's convenient will skip every difficult week of his life. A man who has built the identity of I am someone who trains will drag himself to the gym during the worst periods, because not training would be a violation of who he is. The internal dissonance of not being who you are is more powerful than the discomfort of the training. Build a pressure identity. Not a fantasy, a trained, accumulated, evidence-based identity that you reinforce through small and deliberate daily choices. Cold showers. Not because they're comfortable, because every morning you choose discomfort when warmth is available, you add to the jar. Train when you don't want to. Speak the hard truth when silence is easier. Have the conversation you've been avoiding. Make the difficult call. Do the thing that needs doing when every instinct says to postpone it. Each of these small acts is a deposit. A piece of evidence about who you are. And the man who has made 10,000 small deposits, over months and years, in the quiet when no one is watching, that man steps into the crisis with an account no pressure can empty. Marcus Aurelius called it building character as a craftsman builds his craft. Deliberately. Consistently. With attention to the small things. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The impediment is not the enemy. The impediment is the material. And every day you work with it rather than away from it, you are building the man the crisis will reveal. Start filling the jar today. The pressure will come and go looking for the man who emptied it. Point 8. Let go of the outcome, obsess over the process. On September 12, 1962, John F. Kennedy stood at Rice University in Houston and said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." He did not say we will try to go to the moon. He did not say we hope to go to the moon. He said we will go. By the end of this decade. With full national commitment. At the moment he said those words, the United States did not have the technology to do it. The rocket didn't exist. The guidance computers didn't exist. The spacesuits needed for a lunar surface were theoretical. The metallurgy needed to survive re-entry from lunar trajectory was unsolved. NASA engineers estimated privately that the odds of success were somewhere around 50%. The odds of a catastrophic failure, publicly visible, politically humiliating, with American lives lost, were very real. And yet every person involved in the Apollo program, from Kennedy himself to the engineers designing the hatch seals on the lunar module, had to make the same psychological choice every single day: forget the moon. Do today's problem. Not the mission. Not the destination. Today's problem. The engineer who spent 1963 solving the fuel injection equation for the F-1 engine did not think about Neil Armstrong stepping onto the lunar surface. He thought about combustion instability, and whether his proposed solution would hold at full thrust. One problem. One day. One test. Again the next day. This is the paradox of pressure and outcome. The more intensely you focus on the outcome, the more pressure you create and the worse you perform. The more completely you focus on the process, on the right action in this moment, the less pressure dominates you and the better you perform. The outcome is what you want. The process is what gets you there. And the process is the only territory you actually control. Seneca, who was at various points in his life one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Empire, and also a man living in exile with nothing, wrote extensively about what he called the corruption of outcome attachment. He had seen it destroy men who had everything. He had seen it break men who had survived physical disasters only to be undone by their terror of losing what they had recovered. True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future, he wrote. And coming from a man who had navigated enormous wealth, enormous power, enormous loss, and eventual forced suicide ordered by the emperor he had served, these were not comfortable words of a philosopher in a garden. These were the conclusions of a man who had tested them against everything life could throw. The attachment to outcome, the clinging, is what transforms healthy ambition into crippling anxiety. Caring about the result inspires effort. Clinging to the result produces panic, poor decisions, and often the very failure you are most terrified of. This is the move. When you feel pressure building around an outcome you cannot fully control, go smaller. Go more specific. Go more process. What does this hour require? Not this year, this hour. What is the next correct action? What would doing this with integrity look like, regardless of how it turns out? The Apollo engineers went to the moon by solving today's problem. Correctly. Completely. Without thinking about the moon. What is your moon? Go there. Do today's test right first. Point 9. Use the pressure, don't manage it. In ancient Sparta, the coming-of-age ritual for adolescent boys was called the Cryptia. After years of the agoge, the Spartan training regimen that began at age 7 and involved progressive physical hardship, communal living, and deliberate deprivation, young men were sent out alone into the Laconian countryside for months. No weapons beyond a knife. No shelter. No rations. No safety net. They had to survive by their own skill, their own intelligence, their own resourcefulness. They hunted at night. They slept in the open. They navigated unfamiliar terrain in complete isolation. The ones who came back warriors. Not because the wilderness made them warriors. Because the years of preparation had already made them warriors, and the Cryptia was the test that verified it, and cemented it. The Spartans understood at an institutional level what modern sports science has confirmed empirically. The body and mind expand their capacity in response to managed stress. Not despite stress. Through it. The stress is not the cost of growth. The stress is the mechanism of growth. Sports scientists call this eustress, the positive form of stress that stretches capacity rather than breaking it. The critical distinction between eustress and distress is not the intensity of the stimulus. It's whether the stress is calibrated appropriately to the current capacity of the individual, challenging, but survivable. Like progressive overload in strength training, the weight that builds the muscle is the weight that is hard but liftable. Too light and there's no adaptation. Too heavy and there's injury. Calibrated right, and the muscle grows. Your pressure tolerance is a muscle. When pressure arrives and you feel the physiological response, elevated heart rate, heightened alertness, adrenaline, heightened senses, recognize what that actually is. Your body is giving you every resource it has. This is the emergency mobilization of your entire biological system to help you perform. The man who panics takes this gift and fights it. His energy goes into resisting the sensation of pressure, tightening against it, pulling away from it, trying to make the feeling stop. He gets smaller. The pressure wins before the situation even unfolds. The man who has built a pressure identity does something radically different. He feels the same things. The same heart rate. The same adrenaline. The same heightened awareness. And he reads it differently. I'm on. The stakes are real. This is the engine running. He leans toward the pressure rather than away from it. He uses the activation state rather than fighting it. Navy SEAL instructors teach this explicitly through the protocol of deliberate, repeated exposure. Trainees are put in high-stress environments again and again, not to break them, but to recalibrate what their nervous system reads as emergency. What feels like drowning on day 1 of pool competency becomes navigable on day 15. Not because the water changed. Because the nervous system was retrained. You do not need Hell Week. You need the daily practice of voluntary discomfort. The cold shower. The extra mile. The difficult conversation you didn't postpone. The public commitment you honored even when it was hard. The workout you completed when you wanted to stop at the halfway mark. Each time you go into discomfort voluntarily, and come out the other side functional, your nervous system receives one update. This was hard, and I survived. This was hard, and I performed. Hard is not fatal. Repeated enough times, the nervous system recalibrates. What was once a threat becomes an activation signal. What once caused panic becomes a familiar landscape you know how to navigate. This is what the Spartans were engineering. This is what elite military units engineer today. This is what Goggins engineered in himself through obsessive self-imposed trials. And this is what you are engineering through daily chosen difficulty. Stop managing pressure. Start using it. Every uncomfortable thing you do today expands the capacity of the man who will face the next thing. Point 10. The calm after the storm is built in the quiet before it. In 1964, a 46-year-old man sat in a cell on Robben Island, off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa. The cell was 8 feet by 7 feet. He had a mat on the floor and a bucket. The light came from a single bulb. He was permitted to write 2 letters a year, receive 2 visitors a year, and read, in limited supply, from a prison library. He was told when to sleep, when to eat, when to work in the lime quarry, and when to return to the cell. His name was Nelson Mandela. He would remain in that cell, and later in marginally better prison conditions, for 27 years. And when he walked out of Victor Verster prison in February of 1990, into the blinding South African sunlight, he was not a broken man. He was not a bitter man. He was not a man depleted by the weight of what had been done to him. He was, by almost every account of those who knew him before and after, more psychologically whole, more capable of love, more able to lead with wisdom, and without vengeance than the man who had gone in. 27 years. 8 feet by 7 feet. And he came out larger than when he went in. When journalists and biographers asked him how, his answers were always some variation of the same thing: the work he did on himself in the quiet. He exercised every morning, a rigorous routine in his cell, completed before the guards were awake. He read voraciously. He meditated. He studied. He thought carefully, deliberately, and for years, about the South Africa he wanted to help build after his release, an event he believed in with total conviction despite having no evidence it was coming. He maintained his body. He maintained his mind. He refused, this is the key word, he refused to allow his inner state to be governed by his external conditions. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Not borrowed words, though they come from the poem Invictus. For Mandela, they were a daily operational reality. They were the description of what he was actually doing in that cell, every single day, for 27 years. Here is the final truth of this entire video, and it is the one that determines whether everything else matters. The calm you need when the pressure arrives is not available for same-day delivery. You cannot order it when the crisis comes. You cannot generate it on demand through willpower in the moment when your heart is pounding and the stakes are real. You cannot fake it into existence. It must be built. Slowly. Quietly. Deliberately. In the ordinary days before the storm. The morning discipline you keep when nothing is at stake, when there is no pressure, no audience, no consequence, becomes the anchor when everything is. The physical practice you maintain through the boring weeks becomes the physiological reservoir you draw from when the pressure peaks. The meditation you build in the calm becomes the reset button in the chaos. The philosophy you study before the crisis is the map you hold when you're in the dark. Most men treat this interior work as optional. As something to do when there's time. As something that belongs to a later version of their life that has more space, more margin, more of whatever they're waiting for. And when the pressure comes, and it is coming, and it comes for everyone, they discover the account is empty. There is nothing to draw on. Because they spent the quiet years building nothing on the inside. Marcus Aurelius governed the most complex organization in the ancient world. He managed wars, plagues, political betrayal, the deaths of children, the corruption of men around him, and the constant temptation of absolute power. And every single morning, before the empire made its demands, he sat with his journal and did his interior work. Not sometimes. Every morning. He built the calm before the storm, every day, so that when the storm came, and for an emperor the storms never really stop, he had something to draw from. Mandela built his calm in a prison cell with a bucket for a toilet. Roosevelt built his in a Badlands ranch and a childhood boxing gym, gasping for breath. Franco built his in the death camps of Europe, in the most extreme conditions of modern human history. Epictetus built his in slavery, with a broken leg, in 1st century Rome. You are reading this in freedom. You have access to philosophy, to nutrition, to physical training resources, to the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human experience with pressure. You have time that none of those men had. You have the safety to do the interior work without the ceiling of history bearing down on you. The only question, the only one that matters, is whether you will. Start tomorrow morning. Not after the pressure arrives. Now. Wake before the world demands something from you. Sit in the quiet. Breathe deliberately. Write down your intentions. Do one hard physical thing before the day begins. Study one idea from a man whose mind you want to grow toward. Build something inside yourself that the day, no matter how difficult, cannot take. Do this every day. Not when it's convenient. Every day. Because the pressure is coming. It is always coming. And when it arrives, when the building is on fire and the smoke is in the corridor, and the seconds are costing you something, the only man it cannot break is the man who built himself before it got there. Closing. Let me bring you back to where we started. 2 men. 1 burning building. 30 seconds. The first man runs, breathes smoke, loses himself, loses time. The second man stops, breathes, assesses, moves with purpose. The fire is the same for both of them. The difference is entirely on the inside. We have covered 10 principles today, 10 tools forged by men who faced fire far worse than most of us will ever encounter. Let me give them to you one final time, clean and direct. 1. Pressure reveals, it doesn't create. Build the man you want to be revealed as. Start today. 2. The body follows the breath. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. This is not soft, this is a weapon. Use it. 3. Reframe the threat as a test. The reframe changes your chemistry, your clarity, and your performance. 4. Silence the inner commentator. Name it. Redirect to process. Speak to yourself by name. The noise is not information. 5. Control what is yours. Release what is not. Sort the columns before you spend a single drop of energy. 6. The man who slows down wins. 30 seconds. Every time. Give pressure your decision, not your reaction. 7. Build a pressure identity through daily chosen discomfort. Fill the jar. Evidence changes identity. 8. Obsess over process. Let go of outcome. Solve today's problem. The moon is reached one test at a time. 9. Use the pressure, don't manage it. The activation you feel is the engine running. Lean toward it. 10. Build the calm before the storm. In the quiet. Every morning. Before the world arrives. These are not ideas. They were lived by men who had no room for ideas that didn't work. The philosophy of the Stoics was forged in slavery, in exile, in empire, in death camps, in prison cells, in Antarctic ice. It was tested in the hardest laboratories in human experience, and it survived. Because it is true. Because it reflects something real about what a human being can become when he decides to stop being governed by what happens to him and start governing himself. That decision is available to you right now. Not later. Not when things are better. Not when the conditions are right. Now. In whatever fire you're currently sitting in. If this video reached something in you, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. Hit the bell. We are here every week building the kind of men that pressure cannot break. Every video adds something to the foundation. This is a long project. You want to be in it for all of it. Share this with a man who needs it. Not every man you know is ready to hear it. But you know the ones who are. The ones who are in the fire right now. The ones who are close to breaking. The ones who are better than they're currently living. Send it to them. Because this work is not just for you. It never was. There is a video right there that goes even deeper into one of today's principles. Watch it next. And remember what we said at the start. The only gap between the man who panics and the man who survives is 2 seconds. You now know what to do with those 2 seconds. Go be the second man. Inner Steel, don't panic, master pressure. Copyright Inner Steel channel.